We're continuing on Shulchan Aruch Orach Chaim, Hilchot Kiddush, Hilchot Shabbat, Siman Resh Ayin Dalet. We started Seif Aleph, a discussion based on the Gemara in Masechet Shabbat, Daf Kuf Yud Zayin, of having to have two breads on Shabbat and Yom Tov, Zecher Leman, because we have, of course, the concept of Lechem Mishneh. Ulkatem Lechem Mishneh, the Pasuk says that you would gather double portion on Erev Shabbat, because on Shabbat man would not fall, on Yom Tov the man would not fall, and therefore we have two breads to symbolically show the kavod that we have for a special double portion of Shabbat. Now, of course, the question should be asked, that according to this Heshbon, how many kikarot should you have on a Shabbat that's Erev Yom Tov also? In other words, a 3-day Yom Tov. A 3-day Yom Tov, perhaps in the 40 years of the Midbar, you got 3 times as much, right? You got not Lechem Mishneh, but Meshulash. So maybe we should have 3 breads, right? That would be a simple question, and the answer is, or 4, but not 4, because that's for Friday and Shabbat. So here you're getting for Friday, Shabbat, and Yom Tov. They had 1 day Yom Tov, right? Chutz La'aretz would be like, right, would be quadruple. But the answer, of course, is we're not trying to mimic the amount of bread that they got. We are trying to show kavod to Shabbat, that Shabbat is so special, Yom Tov is so special, that we don't have to work. HaKadosh Baruch Hu provides from before. And therefore, even for a 3, or in Chutz La'aretz, 4-day Shabbat and 3-day Yom Tov afterwards, still would be just Lechem Mishneh. We spoke about a very interesting concept that the Ramah, one of the only places in Shulchan Aruch that he brings actually the mystics, the Al-Pi Kabbalah Psak, is over here. He writes that Shulchan Aruch writes that on Leil Shabbat your Bosei Mina Tachtona, you take from the bottom loaf, is only on Leil Shabbat, is only on Friday night, but on Shabbat morning, and also on Leil Yom Tov, when you're holding the 2 breads of Lechem Mishneh, you should cut from the top one. So according to the Ramah, Friday night, which one do you take from? The bottom one. Shabbat morning, the top one. Leil Yom Tov, the top one, right? Aside from Leil Shabbat. What's the reason? The logical discourse is none. It's Al-Pi Kabbalah, says the Ramah. This is a kolbov, and I got my money. Now the Kaf HaChaim says, no. We don't work like this. Right? So I asked the Kaf HaChaim in Ot Bet over here very passionately that we en lanu ela kabbalat ha'ari. Right? Mekubalim do have differences in the way they view the world of Kabbalah, and generally speaking, the poskim of the Sfaradim follow the Arizal. Many want to say that even within Arizal, you go according to the understanding of Rabbi Shlomo Yisraeli, the holy Rashash. This becomes an issue by itself. Actually, the Vilna Gaon was very much chastised by the people of his generation for having gone against the Ari HaKadosh. Ari HaKadosh was, well accepted in not just the Sfaradim, but even in the communities of Ashkenazim. So his student, Rab Chaim Volozhiner, in the Hakdama that he wrote to the Perush of the Vilna Gaon on Safra de Tzniuta and Zohar HaKadosh, he actually warns, he addresses this question, and he says, look, you have to understand that my Rebbe, the Vilna Gaon, he had utmost kavod that he can't even understand for Ari HaKadosh, to the degree that he writes, and I quote, he says, when he would mention the name of Ari, his knees would bang to each other, trembling, like, mentioning just the name of the Arizal, but at the same time, he felt that he was sophisticated enough to question certain things, that, like the Gemara says in Masechet Chulin, Daf Vav and Daf Zayin, that he felt that he had what to add and what to, for lack of a better term, disagree with in certain parts. So that's the Vilna Gaon by himself. Of course, we have many others. The Ramami Pano, which technically is an offshoot of the Arizal, he's a student, but many others, and this comes from the Maharchu, from Reb Chaim Vital, the prized disciple and Talmid of Ari HaKadosh, that he writes that basically whatever was said aside from his line of acceptance from the Arizal would be questionable, and this is something that has been accepted in many of the Hasidic and Sephardi communities around the globe. So it says the Kaf HaChaim, basically, without getting into too much meat of this subject of what is accepted, what's not accepted, and how accepted it is, different opinions of Ba'alei Kabbalah, of the mystics. The Kaf HaChaim writes in Ot Bet in our Siman over here that we go after the Kabbalah of Arizal, and according to him, he should be actually doing not the bottom one, but the top one, right? In old times. You'll do it that way. Now, Chacham Obadia speaks about this in Halichot Olam, and he speaks about the Ben Ish Chai that talks about this, and he says the Minhag HaOlam seems to be that you do from the bottom one, like the Shulchan Aruch. Despite this, Kaf HaChaim, the Or Letzion actually writes, Rabbi Shaul, he writes that, because, and he's not alone, he's just codifying the other poskim, that because of this machloket, many, what they do is they hold it side by side, right? They hold meaning the bottom of the two chalot are touching each other, and the faces are to the two sides, right? Even if you were doing the 12 chalot or the 4 Pi Kabbalah, you could have the two bottom ones here facing up, and the two top ones you're holding together like this, side by side, or slanted a little bit, says the Or Letzion. And you take from the right one, right, well, it would be holding like this, which would be taking from, from bottom. Again, this is a pshara, a middle ground, says the Or Letzion, to kind of try to fulfill and satisfy all the shittot. But again, Chacham Obadia says very wisely, he says, whatever you do, whatever you do has what to rely on, and when it gets to this area of halakha. Again, one of the interesting topics of machloket within the Mekubalim, which is interesting. Now, when you buy rolls, many times the way they're baked in the bakeries are, they put them together, or even if you bake them at home, and once they rise, they get attached on the sides together, right? Is that considered, by the way, once we're at it, this is the reason that you have the Ashkenazi Yom Tov Chalot, that they're round, right? Aside from other reasons of being round, many times you've seen that there's a 5 pieces on the side, they're all attached, of course, a round challah, which has 6 pieces in it, right? You've seen those? Like 1 in the center, and then 5 it's like a pentagon on the outside, right? It's a very sensitive thing to mention right now. But you have 2 of those, you'd have 12 chalot. That's how this whole thing came about, because they considered them separate pieces. Now, if you have chalot that you baked on your tray or in the bakeries, sometimes it comes 6 in 1 pack, right? That you buy in the plastic bag, 6 or 12 in the pack, and they're kind of like attached on the side together. Is that considered lechem mishneh when I separate them and they rip apart from each other? And the answer is yes, because they have been meant to be separate loaves of bread, separate rolls, and even though that in the process of rising and being baked, they have attached to each other, breaking that adhesion, that attachment is not considered a lechem that's not shalem, and that would be fine, completely fine to be used for lechem mishneh as well. There's no problem with that whatsoever. Now, it's not considered a lechem that's not shalem. Now, we mentioned the women also have been part of the nest of lechem mishnes. Therefore, even if they're doing hamotzi for themselves, they will say on lechem mishneh, not on just one piece of bread. And I think we covered basically all the elements of Seif Aleph. Now the question is, one piece of Mishna Berura here in Seif Katan Dalet, if you take a look, speaking about lechem mishneh, after mentioning that the minhag is like Shulchan Aruch, he brings from the the Pri Megadim, im en lo b'Shabbat pat Yisrael ki im pat shel eno Yehudi. If you don't have pat Yisrael, you only have pat palter. Mutar le'echol mimenu. You could eat from it, says the Mishna Berura. Now, what is this? What does this come from? It's kedai to open a little parenthesis, which doesn't belong here, but it's important once the Mishna Berura mentions it, and that is that Shulchan Aruch in Ra'ad-b Siman Kuf Yud Bet, that discusses the halachot of Pat Akum and Pat Yisrael, within the discussion that is based on the Gemara in Masechet Avodah Zarah and the Mishnah Daf Lamed He Amud Bet and on until Daf Lamed Chet, Maran Shulchan Aruch paskins that us, at least the Sfaradim who have accepted the psakim of the Shulchan Aruch, would not be able to eat pat palter, a non-Jewish baked, commercially baked bread even. In other words, if your neighbor, a non-Jewish neighbor, bakes a private bread, that according to everybody is asur. That's pat balabait, unless you have sakanat nefashot, you're not allowed to have that, right? But pat palter, which means a baker's commercially baked item that has been baked to be sold commercially in his store, it's machloket how much it was accepted as the minhag, even though that it was intended by Chazal to be asur. It didn't catch on in every community in Klal Yisrael because it was just very difficult. Pat is a lifeline for people, is chaye nefesh, and therefore some communities did not accept that minhag. What is the halacha? Maran Shulchan Aruch writes over there in Seif Dalet and Hey, in Siman Kuf Yud Bet in Ra'ad-b, that if you live in a community that Pat Yisrael is available, then it's asur to have Pat Palter of Akum. Right? So if you're in a town that you could get your hand on Pat Yisrael is available for you, then you should be having that. Now, a parenthesis inside the parenthesis would be that quality of bread also is important. So for instance, if you have for your diet, you have to have a certain specific bread. Let's imagine you have to have Ezekiel bread, or you have to have a whole wheat bread, right? And for your health reasons. And there is no whole wheat bread that's Pat Yisrael, but you have non-whole wheat bread that's Pat Yisrael. Says Maran Shulchan Aruch Seif Hey over there, this is considered Pat Techukalo. It's considered that you're in a situation that you don't have the bread that you need, and you could use a Pat Palter, a commercially baked non-Jewish bread, as long as it is kosher, the ingredients, and so on. But if you have it available, then it's asur according to Shulchan Aruch to rely on pat palter and have that bread for your bread. So on Shabbat says the Mishna Berura, if you only have pat eno Yehudi, then of course is mutar to eat from it, right? But the Chacham Ovadia writes on Ben Ish Chai over here in Halichot Olam in Chelek Gimal that on the other hand, if you do have Pat Yisrael available, so then you have to be careful on Shabbat, especially on Shabbat, to only have from Pat Yisrael, even if you're not careful during the course of the week. And this is based on Shulchan Aruch really, and in our yeshiva actually, the yeshiva was very careful with this. The yeshiva was supported by government fund, and they got bread for free, and it was not necessarily Pat Yisrael, right? It was kosher, but it was not Pat Yisrael. But on Shabbat, they went out of the way to buy special Pat Yisrael bread because of this thing. On Shabbat, you want to be more careful. Of course, the Shulchan Aruch writes that in Aseret Yemei Teshuvah, right, the Shulchan Aruch in Hilchot Aseret Yemei Teshuvah, that even for those who are not careful in Pat Yisrael the rest of the year, Aseret Yemei Teshuvah definitely should be machmir. But again, Baruch Hashem, we live in a time and a community that these things are very much available, and a person should be mindful of having Pat Yisrael. And we mentioned already that if you have Pat Palter, even though that you are machmir on Pat Yisrael, you could still use Pat Palter for Lechem Mishneh, because technically speaking, it could be mutar for you. Whereas, let's say Yashan and Chadash, if you have a loaf that's Chadash, that's not Yashan, according to Shulchan Aruch, that's perhaps a Isur Deoraita, it's tarif to eat that, so therefore you can't even use it for Lechem Mishneh, even though you're not planning to eat from that loaf, you're eating from the other one that is Yasha. So it says, Shulchan Aruch, Seif Bet, we're moving on. Mitzvah lifsah b'Shabbat, perusa gedolah shtaspik lo lechol ha'seuda. It's a mitzvah to have a bigger piece cut for Shabbat. That should be sufficient for the entire Seudah. Now, of course, this depends on the way your thing is set up, how much people eat, and how big your rolls are. But that's one of the reasons, by the way, that Ba'al Habayit Bosea. Chazal tell us that the Hamotzi, many people, you go to their house and they give you to say Hamotzi. It's wrong. Ba'al Habayit should be the one that says Hamotzi, because it's his assets, is his bread, and he'll be Ain Tova, he'll give bigger pieces to people. When you're a guest, you don't know how much to give to everyone, and you're afraid to cut big pieces. You want the Baal Habayit to be doing it and give like large, nice pieces to the guest. Certainly on Shabbat, this would be included in this Seif Bet of Shulchan Aruch, Mitzvah Lipsah b'Shabbat, Perusa Gedolah. You want to cut bigger pieces, even if on weekdays you don't do it, because you want to show that the mitzvah is chaviv. It's a chavivut of the mitzvah that you want to show. The people eat a little bit more, right? Have an excuse of having neshama yetera, they eat double, right? And some people wrongfully say that the diet doesn't apply on Shabbat, again, don't gain weight, but they end up being stuck with their diet for the rest of their life. But the maaseh, at the end of the day, people do eat more lechavot Shabbat, and that's something to be mindful of as well. Now, this is according to Rashi, by the way. According to the Rashba, that says you basically cut all the pieces of bread that you have in front of you, and Rav Hai Gaon also paskins like that. You want to do both perushim, that both you want to do perusa gedolah, you want to do bigger pieces. You also want to cut, both of the kikarot, both of the bread that you have in front of you, in order that everyone around the table should eat from them. And this is something that people end up doing anyways, especially when you have guests. The Ben Ish Chai writes that you should take a kazayit for yourself and give a kabetzah for your wife, right? You give a bigger piece to your wife, and that's part of the derech eretz as well, that even though that you have other people around the table, you first give, after you're eating yourself, you first give to your wife before giving any of the guests or anyone else around the table. Now, the right thing would be, if you have father or mother around the table, that you're chayav to their kavod more than respecting your wife. So the right derech eretz thing would be, you ask your parents, halachically, kabbalistically, I have to give my wife first, so mechila. The parents are usually very much understanding of these things. It's not that you're giving disrespect, disrespectfully you're giving them second. It's because of this inyan. So even though that we know that these things are halachically governed, for instance, if you have a kohen, the mitzvah v'kidashto midoraita is to give the kohen the first portion, right? Chelek tchila, Chazal say, to the degree that the Magen Avraham in Siman Aleph, he asks the question, says, why is it that nowadays we don't have this zirut to be careful to give the benching to the kohen? And he says, well, maybe because the chazakah of the kohanim is not as strong as it used to be. We don't have kohanim yuchasim, which actually erupts the entire machloket. We deal with the chazkat keuna nowadays and so on. But nevertheless, taking a portion first is part of the kavod, and therefore, when your parents are around the table with you, you want to, based on Kabbalah, you want to give to your wife first before your parents. Halachically, you should have really given to your father or mother first before your wife, but we want to do this al pi sod, al pi Kabbalah. So the proper thing is to at least once ask mechila from the parents. Say, look, are you okay if I do this? And they'll hopefully say yes, of course, there's no problem. And that would be, smart in-laws should do that anyways, right? So your wife comes first, but you should ask the mechila for once, and that would be covering the rest of the times as well. That concludes Seif Bet, Bezrat Hashem, Seif Gimel. We will start and continue in the days to come. Hazaku Baruch.